A shy Omega waitress greeted the Alpha King's father. Her ancient tongue froze the hall. Eyes down, chin tucked. Elsinia. Do not breathe unless he permits it. Jasara's fingers dug into my shoulder, her nails sharp enough to tear through the rough wool of my tunic. The air in the Blackwood Tavern tasted of ozone and roasted venison, but mostly it tasted of terror. They say Tiberius Crestfall eats omegas for sport if the wine is soured. A stable hand whispered near the scullery door, his face pale as milk. Silence, the tavern master hissed, extinguishing the lantern near the entrance with a trembling hand. The carriage wheels have stopped. Outside, the thunder rolled, not from the storm, but from the heavy, iron-shod boots hitting the cobblestones. The king's father had arrived, and with him, the silence of a grave. I wasn't just a waitress tonight. I was prey hoping to be mistaken for furniture. The rain in the capital of Oakhaven didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, turning the cobblestones into a mirror that reflected the grey, oppressive sky. I, Elsinia, knew the grime well. It was the camouflage that kept me alive. At 22, I was an anomaly, an unmated, unclaimed Omega, working the floor of the city's most notorious tavern, the Iron Hilt. In a society governed by the strict hierarchies of the pack, Omegas of my age were usually accounted for. They were either bonded to a pack, serving as cherished nurturers, or indentured in the high silk houses of the inner district, traded like precious porcelain. But I had slipped through the cracks of the census, a ghost in a grey apron, scrubbing tankards and dodging the wandering hands of drunken mercenaries. I preferred the mercenaries to the high-born. They were predictable. They wanted ale, meat, and a warm body, usually in that order. A sharp look or a spilled tankard was usually enough to deter them. The nobility, however, played games. They liked to hunt things that ran, and tonight, the players entering our establishment were the most dangerous hunters in the realm. "Stop trembling," Jasara snapped, shoving a tray of crystal goblets into my hands. Jasara was a beta, ambitious and cruel, with eyes that calculated the worth of everyone she met. To her, I was worth less than the sawdust on the floor, a liability she kept around only because I worked double shifts for half pay. "If you drop those, I will sell your hair to a wig maker to pay for the breakage." "I won't drop them," I whispered, my voice barely a rustle of dry leaves. My hands were red from the lye soap, shaking not just from fear, but from the bone-deep chill that settled over the city whenever the royal guard drew near. "Speak up when you address your betters, or don't speak at all," she sneered, adjusting her bodice to show more skin. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to them. "King Sorin is coming, and his father, Lord Tiberius. Do you understand the gravity, you little mouse? Lord Tiberius ruled this land with a fist of iron before he passed the crown. He values strength. He despises weakness. You are nothing but weakness." I nodded, gripping the tray until my knuckles turned white. Weakness. That was the word they branded on us. Omegas were soft, yielding, designed to comfort and serve. We were the hearthfires, not the storms. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark window, pale skin, large violet eyes that I kept hidden behind a fringe of messy chestnut hair, I felt the familiar, burning knot in my chest. It wasn't weakness. It was a cage. My grandmother, before she vanished into the mist of the Greywood 10 years ago, had taught me things no Omega should know. She hadn't taught me how to sew or how to pour tea. She taught me the history of the stars, the lineage of the wolves, and the Aethelgard, the ancient tongue. It was a dead language, spoken only by the first wolves and the high priests of the old religion. It was forbidden. To speak, it was to claim a heritage that challenged the current regime, a regime built on the suppression of the old ways. "Why do I need to know this?" I had asked her once, sitting by a dying fire, tracing the complex runes she drew in the dirt. "Because, little bird," she had rasped, her eyes milky with age but sharp with prophecy. "One day the wolves will forget who they are. They will mistake cruelty for strength and fear for loyalty, and you will have to remind them." "Remind them of what? That the moon does not bow to the wolf. The wolf howls to the moon. The memory faded as the tavern door groaned open. The sound was like a gunshot in the crowded room. Instantly, the boisterous noise of the tavern died. Musicians stopped mid-strum. Barmaids froze with pitchers in midair. The laughter of the mercenaries choked off into a suffocating silence. The wind howled through the open door, extinguishing half the candles. In the flickering gloom, silhouette figures emerged. They were huge, their shoulders broad enough to block out the storm. The scent hit me first, a crushing wave of pheromones. Pine, frozen earth, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Alphas, prime alphas. First came the Royal Guard, armored in black steel, their faces hidden behind visors shaped like snarling wolves. They moved with a synchronized, lethal grace, fanning out to secure the perimeter. Then, a man who walked with a cane, though he clearly didn't need it for support. Tiberius Crestfall. He was 60, but he looked like a mountain carved from granite that had weathered 1,000 storms. His hair was silver white, tied back severely, and his eyes were the color of glacial ice. He radiated a cold, suffocating pressure that made the beaters in the room lower their heads instinctively. And behind him, the king, Soren Ironhaven. I had seen his face on coins, but gold did not do him justice. It couldn't capture the predatory fluidity of his movement or the darkness that seemed to cling to him like a cloak. He was terrifyingly beautiful. Dark hair fell over his eyes, which were a burning amber, the color of whiskey held up to fire. He didn't wear a crown. He wore the authority of a predator who knows he has no natural enemies. He looked bored, dangerous, and utterly lethal. I shrank back against the taproom wall, praying to the old gods that I would become invisible. I pressed myself into the shadows, the tray of crystal serving as a fragile shield between me and the monsters who ruled us. "Wine," Tiberius barked, his voice a gravelly rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "And clear this rabble. I require silence." The tavern master, a portly beta named Hemsley, practically tripped over his own feet to obey. "Yes, my lord! At once! Everyone out! Out!" Chairs scraped. People scrambled. In less than a minute, the bustling tavern was empty save for the royal party, the staff, and the suffocating weight of the king's presence. The air was thick enough to choke on. "You," Hemsley pointed a shaking finger at Jasara, then his eyes darted to me. He looked like he was sending us to the gallows. "Both of you, serve the high table. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak unless spoken to. And for the love of the gods, do not spill a drop." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't ready. I was just a waitress. I was just a nobody. But as I stepped out of the shadows, the tray trembling in my hands, I felt a strange sensation, a hum in my blood, a vibration that started in the marrow of my bones. The Aethelgard words my grandmother taught me began to swirl in my mind, unbidden, reacting to the sheer power in the room. They weren't just words. They were living things, waking up after a long hibernation. "Be silent," I commanded my own soul. "Be still. You are grey. You are nothing." The high table was set near the roaring hearth, the only source of warmth in the now drafty hall. The flames cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to claw at the walls. Tiberius sat at the head, his cane resting against his thigh like a scepter. Soren sat to his right, sprawling in the chair with a deceptively casual grace, one booted foot resting on the crossbar of the table. He picked at a splinter in the wood, looking as if he would rather be anywhere else. I approached on the left, Jasara on the right. My footsteps were silent, practiced on the creaky floors of the tavern, but every beat of my heart sounded like a war drum in my ears. "This province is rotting, Soren," Tiberius said, ignoring our approach as if we were ghosts. He stripped off his leather gloves, slapping them onto the table. Dust motes danced in the disturbed air. "The northern packs are restless. They smell weakness in your administration. I received a report from the border raids on the supply lines." Soren swirled the empty space where a goblet should be, his eyes fixed on the fire. "They smell change, Father, not weakness. I disbanded the conscription because we have peace. Why feed a war machine when there is no war? The raids are acts of desperation, not invasion. Peace is a pause between wars, Tiberius snarled, his voice rising. You are naive. You think because you have the alpha blood, they will bow. They bow to fear. You must remind them why the Ironhaven line rules. You must burn a village to save the kingdom. I rule through law, not terror, Soren replied, his voice low but cutting through the air like a blade. He finally looked up, his amber eyes hard. I will not be the tyrant you were, father. The tension at the table was palpable, a physical force that made the air shimmer. I reached the table. My job was simple. Place the goblet, pour the wine, retreat. I had done it 1,000 times. Jessera, however, had other ideas. As she poured for the king, she leaned in low, her bodice straining. She had applied a synthetic scent oil, blooming rose, meant to mimic a fertile omega in distress. It was cloying and sweet, cutting through the masculine scent of the alphas. Your wine, your majesty. She purred, her voice dripping with practiced seduction. She let her hand brush against his shoulder, a breach of protocol that made my breath hitch. Soren didn't even look at her. He didn't flinch. He simply waved a hand dismissively, creating a gust of wind that pushed her back. Leave the bottle. Tiberius, however, turned his icy gaze on her. He sniffed the air and recoiled, his upper lip curling in disgust. You smell of desperation and cheap lavender, girl. It insults my nose. Begone. Jessera flinched as if struck. Her face turned crimson, the artifice of her confidence shattering instantly. She scrambled back, bowing clumsily, her eyes filling with humiliated tears. She retreated to the shadows, shooting a look of pure venom at me, as if her failure was somehow my fault, as if I had willed the king to reject her. Now, it was my turn. I moved toward Tiberius. I kept my head down, focusing on the grain of the wooden table, counting the rings in the timber. 1, 2, 3. I placed the crystal goblet down without a sound. Perfect. I lifted the heavy decanter of dark, red wine, a vintage from the royal cellars brought by their guards. My hands were steady, despite the fear freezing my lungs. I poured, the liquid ribboned into the glass, dark as blood, swirling and settling. Stop, Tiberius commanded. I froze. The glass was half full. The old man turned his head slowly, looking at me for the first time. I could feel his gaze crawling over me, assessing, judging. It felt like being examined by a butcher deciding where to make the first cut. He wasn't looking at my face. He was smelling me. You possess no scent, he observed. The room went deathly silent. Even Soren turned his head, his amber eyes locking onto me. For an alpha, a scentless wolf was a paradox. It was unnatural. It was true. I took herbs, wolfsbane and sage every morning to suppress my omega scent. It was dangerous, bad for the health, causing headaches and fatigue, but it kept me safe. It made me invisible to the noses that hunted us. I am just a servant, my lord, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The kitchen smoke covers all. Lies, Tiberius hissed. Smoke clings to the clothes. You have no scent on your skin. You are a blank slate. Look at me when you speak, Tiberius commanded, his voice dropping an octave, engaging the alpha command. It hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. My knees buckled. My instinct screamed at me to drop to the floor and bare my neck. It was the biological imperative of my rank, hardwired into my DNA. Submit, submit, survive. But the hum in my blood grew louder. A shield of ancient words formed in my mind, bracing me against the psychic weight of his voice. I slowly lifted my chin. I met his eyes. Tiberius Crestfall blinked. He had expected submission, a whimpering mess on the floor. Instead, he found a waitress in a stained apron, meeting the gaze of the former king with violet eyes that did not waver. Soren sat up straighter, the boredom vanishing from his face completely. He looked from his father to me, a spark of genuine interest lighting his dark eyes. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "What is your name, girl?" Soren asked. His voice was different from his father's, richer, like dark chocolate and smoke. It didn't demand. It invited. It wrapped around me, testing my defenses. "Elsinia, your majesty." Elsinia. Tiberius tasted the name like it was spoiled meat. A high name for a low creature. "Who sired you?" "I have no family, my lord. I am an orphan of the Greywood." Tiberius narrowed his eyes. "The Greywood? That cursed forest is full of traitors and witches. It is where the old religion went to die." He suddenly reached out, his hand moving with the speed of a striking cobra, and grabbed my wrist. I gasped, the decanter wobbling in my other hand before I set it down. His grip was crushing. His fingers were like iron bands. "You have the bone structure of the high valleys," he muttered, inspecting my hand, twisting it painfully. "Too delicate for a peasant. Yet you scrub floors. Tell me, girl, are you a spy, an assassin sent by the northern packs to poison my wine?" "No," I cried out, trying to pull back. "I am no one. Please, you're hurting me." "Father, release her," Soren said, his tone warning. "She is a waitress, not a warrior. Look at her. She's terrified. She is hiding something," Tiberius hissed, ignoring his son. He squeezed harder. My bones ground together. A sharp, white-hot pain shot up my arm. I can smell the deception on her. She suppresses her scent. Why? To hide her heat? Or to hide her bloodline? Only the exiles hide their scent. The pain was blinding. The fear was a cold sweat on my skin. But beneath it all, something else woke up. A pride I didn't know I had. A rage inherited from a grandmother who had refused to bow, who had died whispering secrets into the wind. Tiberius leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale wine on his breath and the rotting anger in his soul. "You are nothing," he sneered. "A little grey rat. I should crush your hand just to hear you squeal." He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to scream. He wanted to prove that everyone broke under his touch. The Aethelgard rose in my throat, burning like molten gold. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a reflex. It was a defense mechanism older than the crown he used to wear. The tavern was so quiet I could hear the candle wax dripping onto the table. The royal guards had hands on their sword hilts, sensing the spike in aggression from the old king, unsure whether to intervene or watch the slaughter. Tiberius applied more pressure. I felt a metacarpal in my hand shift, threatening to snap. The agony was a sharp, screaming note in my mind. "Beg," he whispered, a cruel smile touching his lips. I opened my mouth. I meant to say please. I meant to say mercy. I meant to become the nothingness he claimed I was. Instead, the air pressure in the room dropped. My eyes burned. A voice that did not sound like my own, a voice that resonated with the timbre of bells and the crash of waves. A voice of the earth itself spilled out. "Velka nimbasa, arach sul, niveraton tharum." The sound was physical. It rippled through the air like a shock wave. It vibrated the wine in the goblets, sending ripples across the dark surface. The candles flared, the flames turning momentarily blue before settling back to orange. The heavy oak table shuddered. Tiberius released my hand as if he had been burned. He fell back against his chair, his cane clattering to the floor. His face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. His mouth hung slightly open. The cruelty replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. The silence that followed was not the silence of obedience. It was the silence of a world turned upside down. Soren was on his feet in an instant, his chair clattering backward. He stared at me, his eyes wide, his pupils blown black, eclipsing the amber. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "What did you say?" Soren breathed, his voice barely audible. I clutched my throbbing hand to my chest, trembling violently. The power drained out of me as quickly as it had come, leaving me dizzy and terrified. The room spun. I don't know. I didn't mean to." She spoke the high speech. Tiberius whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and awe. He pointed a shaking finger at me. The tongue of the first wolves. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a dawning horror. The phrase I had spoken. I knew what it meant in my heart, even if my mind hadn't formed it. Release the hand that feeds you, King of Ash. I am not your prey. It was a rebuke, a reprimand from a superior to a subordinate. An Omega Waitress had just commanded an Alpha King, using the holy language of their ancestors, a language that held power over the very blood in their veins. "Seize her!" Tiberius roared, finding his voice. He slammed his fist on the table. "She is a witch, a heretic. She dares to use the sacred tongue against me. Seize her!" The guards surged forward, boots thundering on the wood, swords drawn with the hiss of steel. "Stand down." Soren's voice cracked through the room like a whip. It was the alpha roar, a sonic dominance, that forced every wolf in the room to freeze. The guards halted mid-step, struggling against the instinct to drop to their knees. The windows rattled in their frames. Soren stepped between me and the guards. He placed himself between me and his father. He was a wall of black leather and royal anger, his back to me, shielding me from the room. "She is under my protection," Soren growled, facing his father. His posture was aggressive, challenging. "Are you mad?" Tiberius spat, standing up, retrieving his cane. "You heard her. Only the high priestesses of the Silver Moon could speak that tongue, and they were slaughtered 50 years ago. She is an abomination. She is a threat to the throne. Or she is a survivor," Soren said, not looking back at me, though I could feel the heat radiating from him. "And I will not have her slaughtered in a tavern because you felt threatened by a girl." "I am not threatened," Tiberius shouted, his composure shattering. "I am protecting our legacy." "That language is dangerous, Soren. It wakes things that should sleep. It commands the elements. If she knows the words, she knows the rebellion." Soren turned to me. The intensity of his gaze pinned me to the spot. He ignored his father, ignored the guards. He reached out, not to hurt, but to examine. He took my injured hand, the one his father had crushed so gently it made my breath hitch. His thumb brushed over the bruising already forming on my wrist. "Who taught you those words, Elsinia?" he asked softly. "My grandmother," I whispered, tears spilling over. "She told me they were just stories. Lullabies. Stories do not make the fire turn blue," Soren murmured. He looked at my wrist, then deeper, into my eyes. He sniffed the air near my neck, past the scent of the wolfsbane. There, underneath the herbs. I can smell it now. Ancient, like rain on hot stones. Like ozone. "Soren," Tiberius warned, his hand drifting to the dagger at his belt. "Step aside. I will finish this." "No," Soren said. He turned back to the room, his authority absolute. "Captain of the Guard." "Yes, sire." A massive soldier stepped forward, sheathing his sword. "Clear the tavern. Arrest anyone who speaks of what happened here tonight. If a word of this leaves this room, heads will roll. Secure the perimeter." "Yes, sire." Soren turned back to me. "You are coming with us." With you?" I stammered, backing away until I hit the table. "To the dungeons. Please, I won't speak it again. I swear." Soren's lips quirked in a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that was equal parts fascination and danger. It was the smile of a collector finding a rare jewel in the mud. "No, Elsinia, not the dungeons. To the palace. If you speak the tongue of kings, then you belong in the court." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear, his breath warm against my ear. "And because my father wants you dead, and for the first time in 10 years, I am genuinely interested in something." He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled me toward the door, past the fuming, white-faced Tiberius who looked ready to strike us both down, past the terrified Gessera huddled in the corner, and out into the storm. The rain soaked me instantly, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the electric touch of the king's hand on mine. I was no longer the invisible waitress. I had spoken the words that froze the hall, and now I was walking into the lion's den, Hand in hand with the wolf, the royal carriage awaited, a black monstrosity with the crest of the Iron Wolf on the door. Sorin opened it himself, ushering me inside. As I climbed in, leaving my old life behind in the mud, I caught one last glimpse of Tiberius standing in the tavern doorway. He wasn't looking at me with anger anymore. He was looking at me with fear, and that terrified me more than anything. The ride to the Iron Citadel was a blur of rain-lashed windows and suffocating silence. Inside the carriage, the air was thick with the scent of Sorin, dark amber, ozone, and the terrifying heat of a prime alpha in close quarters. He didn't speak. He simply watched me from the shadows of the velvet seat, his eyes reflecting the passing gaslights like a predator tracking movement in the dark. When the carriage finally halted, it wasn't the relief I expected. It was the beginning of a different kind of terror. The citadel loomed above us, a monstrosity of black stone and jagged spires that pierced the stormy sky. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a weapon aimed at the heavens. "Welcome to your new reality, Elsinia," Sorin murmured as the footman opened the door. I stepped out, my legs trembling, into a courtyard swarming with servants and guards. The moment my foot touched the polished stone, I felt the weight of 100 eyes. They weren't looking at me with the lust of the tavern patrons. They were looking at me with confusion and disdain. "Why is the king bringing a stray dog home? Take her to the East Wing." Sorin commanded a severe-looking woman with hair pulled back so tight it pulled at her eyes. "Clean her, burn those rags, and fetch the physician. I want to know exactly what is in her blood." "The East Wing, sire?" The woman, Mistress Helga, blinked, her composure slipping. "But that is the royal quarter." Did I stutter? Sorin's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a falling guillotine. "No, Your Majesty." I was whisked away before I could look back at him. I was marched through corridors of marble and gold, past tapestries depicting the slaughter of the Great War, past statues of wolves with eyes of ruby. The opulence was nauseating. It was too much light, too much gold, too much everything for a girl used to the grey shadows of a tavern. They brought me to a chamber larger than the entire floor of the Iron Hilt. A bath was drawn, steaming with rosewater and milk. "Strip," Helga commanded. I hesitated, clutching my rough tunic. "Please, do not make me call the guards, girl. You smell of grease and fear. The king will not tolerate it." I obeyed. As the hot water submerged me, scrubbing away the grime of my old life, I felt exposed in a way I never had before. They scrubbed my skin until it was raw. They washed my hair 3 times with oils that smelled of jasmine and sandalwood. They weren't cleaning a person. They were polishing an object. When I emerged, wrapped in a robe of silk so fine it felt like water, I caught my reflection in a gilded mirror. Letty, the girl staring back, was a stranger. The dirt was gone, revealing pale, luminous skin. My hair, usually a matted mess, fell in soft, chestnut waves around my shoulders. My violet eyes, usually hidden, seemed huge and startlingly bright. I looked. Noble. The door creaked open. I expected Helga. Instead, a man slipped in. He was tall, thin as a rail, with skin the color of parchment, and eyes that were entirely black. No whites, just pools of ink. Uriel Darkwood, the king's shadow, the royal spymaster. I backed away until I hit the vanity table. "So," Uriel whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. "This is the little mouse that roared." He circled me, not touching, but sniffing the air. "Sorin is intrigued, Tiberius is terrified, and I am skeptical. I am just a waitress," I stammered. "No." Uriel stopped in front of me, leaning down. "A waitress serves the wine. You changed the wine. I saw the report. The molecular structure of the liquid was altered for 3 seconds. Alchemy, through acoustics. It is impossible." He reached into his robe and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. "Drink this." "What is it?" "Truth serum, or poison, depending on your heritage." He smiled. A thin, bloodless line. If you are a spy, you will die. If you are what Soren thinks you are, you will merely sleep. I stared at the vial. This was the test. And if I refuse, then I cut your throat right here and tell the king you tried to escape, he said casually. I took the vial. My hand shook. I thought of my grandmother. The moon does not bow. I drank it. Fire raced down my throat. My vision blurred. The floor rushed up to meet me. The last thing I heard was Uriel's dry chuckle and the distant slam of a heavy door. I woke up in a different room. This one smelled of old paper, leather, and him. I sat up, gasping. I was on a velvet chaise lounge in what appeared to be a massive library. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with books. Rain lashed against a stained glass window that depicted a wolf devouring a son. Soren was sitting at a desk a few feet away, reading a crumbling scroll by the light of a single oil lamp. He had discarded his heavy armor and wore a loose white shirt, unbuttoned at the top, revealing the hard lines of his chest. He looked tired, human. You survived, he said without looking up. Uriel, he poisoned me, I rasped, my throat dry. He tested you, Soren corrected, finally turning to face me. If you had any feral blood, the blood of the northern assassins, that serum would have stopped your heart. Instead, it merely cleared your system of the wolfsbane you've been taking. He stood up and walked toward me. As he moved, the air changed. Without the suppressants, my true scent was beginning to bleed through. It was faint, but I saw his nostrils flare. Vanilla, he murmured, stopping inches from me. And rain. It is a quiet scent, gentle. I pulled the silk robe tighter around me. Why am I here, Your Majesty? Why didn't you let your father kill me? Because my father destroys what he doesn't understand, Soren said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. I prefer to study it. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers were rough, calloused from the sword, but his touch was shockingly gentle. The contrast sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. That language, Elsinia. Do you know what it is? The Aethelgard, I whispered. The language of creation, he corrected. The myths say the first Alpha didn't bite the world into submission. He sang it into existence. But the words were lost, stolen, burned, forgotten. Until tonight, he leaned in, his hand cupping my jaw, tilting my face up. His thumb brushed my lower lip. The intensity in his eyes was hypnotic. Say it again. I can't. It only comes when I'm afraid. Then fear me, he whispered. His aura flared. The room darkened. The predatory weight of a prime alpha slammed into me. It was a challenge, a domination attempt. But instead of fear, I felt heat. My body reacted to his, not as a threat, but as a mate. The biological pull was undeniable. My breath hitched. My heart raced, but not with terror. No, I breathed, my eyes locking with his. I am not afraid of you, Soren. The use of his name without the title hung in the air. The pressure vanished instantly. Soren stared at me, stunned. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed him from a king into a man. You are a dangerous thing, Elsinia, he murmured. You defy my father. You survive my spy master, and now you deny my command. He stepped back, breaking the spell. He walked to the window, looking out at the storm. Tomorrow, the court gathers for the lunar ball. The high families will be there. My father will be there. They will want to see the witch I dragged in from the gutter. He turned back to me, his face hard again. They will try to break you. They will try to make you speak the words to prove you are a heretic, or they will mock you to prove you are nothing. You must be iron, Elsinia. Can you do that? I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my chin was high. I have survived 22 years as an Omega in the slums, Your Majesty. I know how to be invisible. I don't want you to be invisible, Soren said, his eyes burning. Tomorrow, I want you to be seen. The grand ballroom of the Iron Citadel was a kaleidoscope of violence disguised as elegance. Chandeliers made of diamond and bone hung from the vaulted ceiling. The floor was black marble, polished to a mirror shine. Hundreds of nobles, the alphas and betas of the high families, milled about in silks and velvets, their scents a nauseating mix of expensive perfumes and underlying aggression. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, my hand resting on Soren's arm. They had dressed me in a gown of midnight blue, the fabric shimmering like starlight. It was modest, high-necked, and long-sleeved, but it clung to my frame in a way that made me feel naked. My hair was braided with silver thread. "Breathe," Soren whispered. "If you faint, I'll have to carry you, and while I wouldn't mind, it would ruin your entrance." The herald struck the floor with his staff. His Majesty, King Soren Ironhaven, and his guest, the Lady Elsinia. The silence was instantaneous. Every head turned. The weight of their judgment hit me like a physical wind. I saw sneers, raised eyebrows, and open hostility. We descended. Waiting at the bottom of the stairs was a woman who looked like a swan made of ice. She was tall, blonde, and impeccably beautiful. She wore white, the color of purity, but her eyes were sharp as flint. Lady Heleneva, the daughter of the Northern Duke, Soren's intended mate by political decree. "Soren," she purred, stepping forward and ignoring me entirely. We were worried. "Exaggerations, as always, Helena," Soren said smoothly, though I felt his arm tense beneath my hand. "Allow me to introduce Elsinia." Heleneva finally looked at me. Her gaze raked over my dress, my hair, my face. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, the tavern girl," she said, her voice loud enough to carry to the nearby onlookers. "How quaint. Did you run out of jesters, Soren?" A titter of laughter ran through the crowd. "She is my guest," Soren said coldly. "Treat her with the respect you would offer me. Respect is earned, Your Majesty," a gravelly voice interrupted. Tiberius emerged from the crowd, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked recovering, but his eyes were burning with vengeance. He stood next to Heleneva, forming a united front of the old guard. "And what has she earned?" Tiberius sneered. "She served wine. Now she wears silk. It is an insult to every noble in this room who bleeds for their rank." The crowd murmured in agreement. The atmosphere was turning hostile. I felt the panic rising in my throat. I was an imposter here. I was a fraud, perhaps, Heleneva said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We should test her worth. If she is truly special enough to stand by the king, surely she has some talent. Do you play the harp, girl? Do you recite poetry?" I stammered. "She speaks," Tiberius said darkly. "Don't you, girl? Go on. Speak your devil words for the court. Let them see what you are." He was baiting me. He wanted me to speak the Aethelgard, so he could brand me a witch in front of the witnesses. He wanted an execution, not a party. Soren stepped forward to intervene, but I squeezed his arm, stopping him. I looked at Heleneva. I looked at Tiberius. I saw the cruelty in their eyes. The entitlement. They thought power was something you wore like a crown. I took a step forward, separating myself from Soren's protection. "I do not play the harp, my lady," I said, my voice clear and steady, surprising even myself. "And I do not recite poetry for amusement." "Then what are you good for?" Heleneva laughed. "Scrubbing floors?" "I listen," I said softly. I closed my eyes. I didn't reach for the anger this time. I reached for the truth. I let the hum in my blood expand, not into a shout, but into a whisper. I didn't speak the high tongue. I just pushed. I pushed my senses out. Suddenly, the room gasped. The candles in the chandeliers flared brighter. The wind outside stopped howling, and every glass of wine in the room, hundreds of them, began to vibrate. A low, musical note filled the hall, a perfect, resonant frequency that sang of sorrow and old memories. It wasn't a command, it was a harmony. I opened my eyes. The wine in Heleneva's glass had turned from red to clear water. She shrieked, and dropped the glass. It shattered, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. She poisoned my drink!" Heleneva screamed, pointing at me. "No," Soren said, his voice filled with awe. He stepped to the shattered glass and dipped his finger in the puddle. He tasted it. Pure water. Spring water. He looked at me, and then at the court. "She didn't poison it," Soren announced, a fierce pride ringing in his voice. "She purified it." Tiberius looked as if he had been slapped. The court stared at me, no longer with disdain, but with fear and wonder. I had not used the language of war. I had used the language of healing, and in a room full of killers, that was the most dangerous thing of all. But as I looked across the room, I saw Uriel Darkwood in the shadows. He wasn't looking at the water. He was looking at the windows, where dark shapes were beginning to gather against the glass. The magic had a cost. I had rung a bell, and something in the dark had heard it. The sound of the glass shattering was not loud. It was a delicate tinkle, like a wind chime disturbing a heavy sleep. But in the silence following my purification of the wine, it sounded like a cannon blast. Uriel Darkwood was the first to move. He didn't run. He simply dissolved into motion, a blur of grey robes sliding between the stunned nobles. "Get back!" Uriel hissed, his voice projecting across the cavernous ballroom. "Away from the windows!" But it was too late. The massive stained glass window, the one depicting the first wolf, exploded inward. It wasn't the wind. It was a body. A creature, massive and furred in vantablack, crashed onto the marble floor, sliding on its claws, carving deep gouges into the stone. It stood on hind legs, towering over the tallest alpha in the room. It was wolf-like, but wrong. Its jaw unhinged too wide. Its eyes were burning red coals, devoid of soul or pack logic. "Verakai," Tiberius whispered, his face turning the color of ash. He gripped his cane until the wood groaned. "The shadow wolves. They have been extinct for a century." "They were sleeping," Soren said, drawing the longsword from his hip, the steel singing as it left the scabbard. He stepped in front of me, a human shield against the nightmare, and Elsinia just woke them up. The beast roared a sound that wasn't a growl, but a scream of void and hunger. It was followed by another crashing window, and another. 3 more beasts landed. Then 5. Panic, absolute and primal, seized the court. The high lords and ladies, so arrogant moments before, scrambled like rats. Silk tore, jewels scattered, and screams echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The royal guard formed a perimeter, but the Verakai moved with supernatural speed, batting armored soldiers aside like tin dolls. "Elsinia, stay behind me," Soren commanded, his voice steady, though I could smell the spike of adrenaline in his scent, acrid and sharp. "They are here for me," I realized, watching the lead beast sniff the air. It ignored the fleeing nobles. It ignored the guards. Its burning eyes locked onto me. My blood, singing with the Ethelgard, was a beacon in the dark. "Then they will have to go through me," Soren growled. The lead Verakai lunged. Soren met it head-on. He didn't shift, there was no time, but he fought with the ferocity of his beast. He ducked under the slashing claws, driving his sword upward. The blades sparked against the creature's hide, hard as ironwood. "It's not enough," Uriel shouted, throwing a handful of silver dust that flared into blinding light, disorienting 2 of the beasts. "Their hides are spell-forged. Steel won't cut them." I watched, paralyzed, as the ballroom turned into a slaughterhouse. Tiberius was fighting back-to-back with the captain of the guard, using his heavy cane as a bludgeon, smashing a beast's snout with a strength that belied his age. But there were too many of them. One of the creatures flanked Soren. It swiped, its claws raking across his arm. Blood bright, royal red sprayed onto the black floor. "Soren!" I screamed. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. The lead beast loomed over him, jaws opening to tear out his throat. Fear, cold and sharp, vanished. In its place, a white-hot fire ignited in my chest. It wasn't the quiet hum of the wine anymore. It was a scream. I didn't think. I ran. I ran past the guards, past Uriel, and threw myself between the king and the monster. "Elsinia, no," Soren roared. I looked up into the red eyes of the Verakai. I smelled its breath rot and old graves. I raised my hand, palm open. "Clatu verata, ni tharum, ni velos." The words ripped from my throat, louder than the storm outside. A shockwave of violet light exploded from my palm. It hit the beast in the chest, not as a physical blow, but as a command. The Verakai froze. For a second, it looked confused. Then, with a howl of frustration, it backhanded me. The force was like being hit by a carriage. I flew backward, skidding across the marble, crashing into the base of the dais. The world went black for a second, then returned in a haze of pain. My ribs burned. My breath was gone. "You dare!" Soren's voice changed. It deepened, distorted, becoming a dual tone of man and wolf. He ignored his injury. He ignored the odds. He launched himself at the beast that had struck me, tackling it to the ground with a savagery that shook the floor. He abandoned his sword, using his bare hands, tearing at the creature's eyes, his rage absolute. But another beast was creeping toward me while he was distracted. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't obey. I looked at the approaching shadow, its claws dripping with drool. "Get up, Elsinia," a voice whispered in my head. It wasn't my voice. It was old, cracked, and familiar. "The greywood does not yield." "Grandmother?" I wheezed. "The words are not a weapon, child. They are a key. You are trying to break the door down. You must unlock it." The beast crouched to spring. I closed my eyes. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I reached for the hum that connected everything: the stone, the storm, the blood, the bone. The beast leaped and hit a wall of air. I opened my eyes. I was standing, though I didn't remember standing. My feet were floating an inch off the ground. My hair was floating around my face, defying gravity, glowing with a faint, lunar luminescence. The beast snarled and threw itself at me again. Again, it bounced off an invisible barrier, whimpering as the impact cracked its ribs. The entire room froze. The battle stopped. Even Soren, panting and covered in black ichor, looked up. I walked forward. I didn't walk towards Soren. I walked towards the center of the room, into the thick of the pack of Verakai. "Elsinia!" Tiberius shouted, blood running down his forehead. "Don't be a fool." I ignored him. I ignored them all. I was listening to the rhythm of the world. The Verakai circled me, 12 of them, sensing a power that dwarfed their own. They were ancient predators, but I was the thing the predators feared. I was the storm. I looked at the Alpha Verakai. "Oskar," I whispered. "Sit." The command wasn't loud, but it resonated in the marrow of everyone present. The Alpha Verakai whined. Its legs trembled. It fought the command, its muscles bunching, its red eyes rolling in madness. "Oskar," I said again, my voice layering over itself, sounding like a choir of women speaking in unison. With a bone-cracking thud, the massive beast dropped to its haunches. It lowered its head, ears flattened. One by one, the other beasts followed. They didn't want to. They were creatures of chaos, but the ancient tongue was the coding of their very existence. They could no more disobey it than fire could refuse to burn. The ballroom was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the terrified nobles. I turned to Heleneva, who was cowering behind an overturned table, her white dress stained with wine and dust. "You asked for a poem," I said, my voice echoing strangely. "Shall I recite the verse of binding?" Heleneva shook her head frantically, unable to speak. I turned to Tiberius. The old king was leaning on his cane, staring at me not with hatred, but with a complex expression of recognition. He knew what I was. He had spent 50 years destroying my kind, and now my kind had saved him. Finally, I turned to Soren. He stood up, clutching his bleeding arm. He looked at me, glowing, levitating, commanding monsters, and he didn't flinch. He walked right through the circle of subdued monsters. He walked right through my invisible barrier. He stopped in front of me. You are hurt, he said softly, reaching out to touch the bruise forming on my cheek where the beast had struck me. I am fine, I said, though the adrenaline was fading and my legs were beginning to shake. Soren, I didn't know I could do that. I knew, he whispered. From the moment you looked my father in the eye. He turned to the room. He looked at the cowering nobles, the battered guards, and the kneeling monsters. Behold! Soren's voice rang out, the Alpha command woven into it. The Verakai have returned. The old war is not over, and the only thing standing between you and the dark is this, Omega. He took my hand. He raised it high. Kneel. Soren commanded the court. It was unheard of. Nobles kneeling to a servant, Alphas kneeling to an Omega. But they had seen the monsters, and they had seen the girl who made them sit like puppies. Slowly, hesitatingly, Tiberius Crestfall lowered himself to one knee. He bowed his head, his silver hair catching the light, and then the rest of the room followed. Heleneva, Uriel, the guards, the dukes. They knelt. I looked at Soren, panic fluttering in my chest. What are you doing? Breaking the wheel. Elsinia, he smiled, pressing a kiss to my knuckles, and starting a new age. The weeks following the Night of Glass were a blur of activity. The Citadel was in chaos, but it was a chaos of reconstruction, not destruction. The Verakai were not killed. Under my command, and with Uriel's alchemical bindings, they were chained in the deep vaults, serving as guardians of the city they had come to destroy. The irony was not lost on anyone. I was no longer the Waitress. I was the Lady of the Voice. It was a title I hadn't asked for, and one that terrified me. I sat in the royal gardens, the winter frost melting off the roses. The sun was out, weak but persistent. You are hiding again, a voice said. I looked up. Tiberius was standing there. He still walked with a cane, but he looked less like a granite mountain and more like a man who had finally put down a heavy load. Lord Tiberius. I stood to bow, but he waved me down. Sit, girl. My knees aren't what they used to be. He sat on the stone bench opposite me. You saved my life. I saved the king, I corrected. You just happened to be standing next to him. Tiberius laughed. It was a rusty, dry sound. Sharp tongue. You get that from Iona. I froze. You knew my grandmother? Knew her. Tiberius looked at the sky. I loved her. Once. Before the crown. Before the wars. She was the most powerful speaker of her generation, and I was an ambitious fool who thought power meant silencing anyone stronger than me. He looked at me, his icy eyes filled with regret. I hunted your kind because I was afraid, Elsinia. I was afraid that if the people knew there was a power greater than the Alpha's fang, they would no longer need a king. I was wrong. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the table between us. This belonged to her. I took it when she fled the capital. I opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, set with a piece of raw moonstone. It is a dampener, Tiberius said. It helps focus the voice so it doesn't tear you apart. She would have wanted you to have it. Why are you giving me this? Because my son intends to marry you, Tiberius said bluntly. And if you are to be queen, you need to control your temper. We can't have you accidentally blowing up the Privy Council every time they disagree with you. I stared at him. Marry me? But the laws are written by men. Tiberius stood up, leaning on his cane. And men can rewrite them, especially when the woman in question commands shadow wolves. He walked away, leaving me with the ring and a heart pounding like a drum. I felt a shadow fall over me. Soren stepped out from behind the trellis. He was wearing his royal formal wear, black and gold, but his hair was windblown. Eavesdropping. Your Majesty? I asked, slipping the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. A cool sensation washed over me, quieting the constant hum in my blood. Gathering intelligence. Soren smiled, sitting beside me. He took my hand, his thumb tracing the silver ring. My father is right, you know, about the marriage part. Is he? I looked at him. I am an Omega, Soren. I was a waitress. Half the kingdom thinks I'm a witch, and the other half thinks you're a goddess, Soren said. He turned to me, his expression serious. I don't care about the kingdom, Elsinia. I care about the fact that for 10 years, I felt like I was sleepwalking, and the moment you spoke in that tavern, I woke up. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. I don't want a submissive queen. I don't want someone to warm my bed and agree with my edicts. I want a partner. I want the storm. I am not easy, Soren, I whispered. I have secrets. I have a temper. Good. He brushed his lips against mine. Peace is boring. He kissed me. It wasn't the tentative kiss of a suitor. It was the claiming kiss of a king. But I didn't melt. I kissed him back with equal force, my hand tangling in his hair, the bond between us snapping into place like a lock clicking shut. The curse was broken. The silence was over, and as the wind rustled through the grey-wood trees in the distance, I swore I could hear my grandmother laughing. The wedding of King Soren and Queen Elsinia was not held in the citadel. It was held in the open meadow of the greywood, under the light of the full moon. There were no walls to keep the people out. Alphas, betas, and Omegas stood shoulder to shoulder. Elsinia did not vow to obey. She vowed to listen. And Soren did not vow to rule. He vowed to protect. The ancient tongue was no longer forbidden. Schools were opened, and the old magic flowed back into the land, healing the soil and the souls of the people. The fear that Tiberius had ruled with was replaced by a strange, chaotic, vibrant hope. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still hard days. There were still arguments, but every time the king and queen looked at each other, the court saw something rare. Two equals, balancing the scales of the world. Love, after all, is the only language that needs no translation. If you enjoyed the saga of the Shy Waitress and the Alpha King, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of magic, romance, and rebellion. Let me know in the comments, would you have saved Tiberius, or let the wolves have him?